Hey everyone, thanks for joining us at the Marketing Share podcast. I'm Alec, your host, and with me is my co-host, Barb. How you doing, Barb?
Hey, Alex. So today we're going to talk one of my favorite topics, attribution.
Is it really one of your favorite topics?
Well, I don't know, really. I don't know if it really is because it's kind of like he said, she said,
I
right?
know, right,
It's my lead. No, it's my
right,
lead.
right. I know.
Actually, attribution is a really important tool for marketers. And we
Yeah,
have an expert today who's going to tell us all about it, right?
yeah. We have coming on our show today, Tracy Sestili. Tracy, we met through a CMO community that we're both part of. And she most recently was both chief marketing officer and chief revenue officer for a company called Intellimise, who up until just a couple months ago was independent, and then they got bought out. But yeah, she's just has a lot of experience, doing marketing attribution. She's been a growth marketer, demand gen kind of expert, also a chief marketing officer throughout her career. So I thought it'd be great to get her on the show because, like marketing attribution, it is a tough topic. It's something that you don't always do, but I think when you find yourself in a position to have to do it, then now all of a sudden you're having to prove stuff about marketing, and then so you kind of feel like, oh boy, like I'm on the defense, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one would argue maybe you should adopt attribution ahead of time so you're never on the defense. So you're the one that actually knows more than people who are asking you. Because what you don't want to be in that situation where the CEO or the board member is going, well, how do I know what to spend that extra $1 million we're going to talk to you about?
Yeah,
What would you do with that? Right. I mean, you
right.
want to have an intelligent answer, and attribution helps you make that decision.
Yeah, but doing it is tough. So I think that's why we're excited to have Tracy and talk to her.
Great.
So should we get into the show?
Let's go.
All right, let's go into it. Hey, Tracy, thanks for joining us in our studio at the Marketing Share podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Alec. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Yeah.
Hi, Barb.
Hi, Tracy.
Let's start out, Tracy, by having you just talk a little bit about your background, your experience, and specifically how you developed your expertise around marketing attribution, a real favorite topic amongst marketers, right? Yeah.
Actually, it brings some people trepidation, right?
Yeah. It's one of my favorite topics. So I've been a CMO a few times. I went from CMO to CRO. I've worked in B2B SaaS for 20 plus years. Prior to my marketing job, I did operations, which was a fun thing. And then, I'd say I got my experience from attribution by sort of getting thrown into the deep end. I inherited a system that someone else had implemented. So always fun.
When I think about attribution, I think when somebody knocks on the door and says, we got to get our handle around where we're getting these leads or where we're not getting these leads. Does it seem to always kind of come to the door in that method, or is that not the case?
I mean, for attribution, I think that it usually comes from the CEO, CFO, or the board, and they're trying to figure out like what's not working because they're not happy with existing reporting. But, if it's working or nobody's asking that question, then I would not introduce attribution. If no one's asking, then yay. But, no one, my feeling is as if no one's asking, nobody cares about attribution. So then why introduce it? Because then it just introduces complexities and questions and, things that you have so many other things to do as a marketer. You don't need to do all that. So,
Yeah. That's why I said it's marketing's favorite topic, right? Because that was somewhat facetious, sarcastic, right? Because you only get asked about it when you're kind of on your back foot, right? It's kind of like and then it's tough to measure in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah.
I actually heard the other day from someone that they said clicks are dead, attribution is dead. So, I mean, why would you tell someone not to start thinking about attribution? Is it something we shouldn't proactively do, or is it related to maybe the size of a company? Certainly it does introduce complexity, like you said, but
yeah, I think as a marketer, if you're going like from 0 to 1, you don't really need attribution because you're just still trying to figure out what's working, right? But I think, as you get further from 1+ and you're scaling, sometimes that question will come up because things aren't working for some particular reason and maybe you don't have insight. And so you might want to start looking down that path and sort of trying to figure out what is the story that you want to tell and how marketing influences a closed won deal. So that's sort of the way I think about it.
So, so let's go down that path. I get what you're saying. In smaller companies, you probably, it's probably added complexity, maybe not worth the juice for the squeeze for it. However, as we start adding investment and scaling the business, it's time. How do you decide which attribution model to choose? There's like a million, right?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, the most common ones are like people talk about first touch and last touch and multi-touch and marketing mix modeling. And those are, I am a fan of multi-touch for a couple of reasons. But let me tell you why I'm not a fan of first touch and last touch. Primarily, those two, the biggest problem is that they undervalue your mid-funnel marketing activities. And there are other problems within each one of them. But, the first touch, you're saying, hey, give 100% of the attribution of this closed won deal to the very first thing that this person did. Well, what if the very first thing that they did was like 3 years ago from a previous marketer that was in your seat? You really don't want to give that, right? I think for last touch, it's, Salesforce sort of has this built into it, right? It's a lead source and it overwrites constantly, right? Every time somebody does something, it's remarkably inaccurate. If you look at that field to see like, well, what did they do to convert, right? To pipeline or to revenue? And it's typically a lot of other things. So this is the reasons why I don't like first touch and last touch. The multi-touch allows you to pick different models within it that allow you to decide what's important to you in your business and whether or not you want to give, what percentage of the ROI you want to give to each touch point, for example. And I think that that's where it makes the most sense. Marketing mix modeling is great if you don't have multi-touch attribution, right? It's like predictive model on aggregate data, usually regression analysis, and it sort of is best for when you don't really have deep sales data or you have this aggregate data that you can look at. And to me, it's great if that's all you have. But if you have the data and you have the ability to introduce multi-touch attribution and you're, 1+, I definitely would do that.
Okay, so those are the ones that you favor more so than others. What's the most common? I mean, is there one that's most common?
It depends on like some companies care about like, what converted the contact into an MQL, right? Or what converted the MQL into a sales qualified lead, into pipeline. And, some care about what actually brought them into the system. There's so many things. It's like, why is that important? Because that's hardly ever what converts them, right? It's never that you're doing one thing. It's sort of like that question you get in any board meeting. It's like, what lever would you pull if I gave you $1 million? Did you?
Oh my God, I've had that question 1,000
times, right? It always comes from somebody who doesn't know anything about marketing. And you're like, oh God, it's more than one lever, right? You think about sending out an email. It takes like a small army to send out an email. So if you want me to say, well, what would I invest in? Lots of things, right? Like graphics, content, email, like deliverability. There's lots of things that I would invest in to send that one email if that was the thing that, made somebody, click.
I usually tell them, think about how you make a decision. You don't make a decision like, input, stimulus, response, right? It's not usually like that. So let me ask you this question. Sometimes I've been in situations where the attribution can kind of put sales and marketing at odds sometimes. And maybe this is in a less mature company where you're not measuring so many of those things, right? So it's kind of like whose lead, who generated that wonderful lead? What do you do in that case where you're kind of put at odds with some of your, sales leaders or something like that based on that? Or is that not something you experienced?
Oh no, I've even experienced that in mature organizations. So, it's like, why are you trying to draw a wedge? And it again goes back to there's something that's not working. To me, I feel very strongly about having a positive relationship with sales, right? we're in it together. Because even if marketing is successful and sales is not, then there's something not working in marketing. Like maybe the leads are crap or they're poor quality, whatever, not in the right ICP. Those, when somebody tries to do that, it's really like just, they're not really asking the real question of like, why isn't it broken? Like, where did the leads come from? I mean, that's something that as a marketer, you should be looking at all the time anyway, right? You want to look at where they're coming from. Are they turning into pipeline? Are they turning into revenue? And to me, I think that whole thing, it really comes down to like figuring out the story that you want to tell with your data. Data is your friend. I'm a big advocate of that.
Some marketers are so afraid of data for whatever reason. I don't know what it is, right? To me, it's like, without it, you are blind, and it's really tough to make those decisions. So you have to use it as your tool and your friend, right?
Well, and it's also easy to get analysis paralysis, right? And dive deep down a rabbit hole that you don't need to dive down to. It's like, there are certain things that are important, right? And like I was talking to one marketer and he said, "Hey, I really care about everything that happened before the first touch." And I was like, why? I mean, sure, you can care, but I guarantee you all the things that are happening there probably aren't really moving the needle all that much, because even in a multi-touch attribution model, they're only getting a very small percentage of the ROI from that deal in the first place. So it's, you need to focus on the big rocks.
Okay, so then let's dig into that a little bit more. So let's say you're working with a marketing leader that's about to implement marketing attribution for the very first time, never done it before. What advice would you give this person? Where to start, what to watch out for, what to do, what not to do?
I always start with, what do you want to report on? And part of that is setting, like before you implement any attribution program, you need to level set with the executive team and the board that it's about influence. It's about marketing's influence on a deal. And in order to make that accurate, right, for you to implement that accurately, you need to figure out what it is that you want to report on. So you have those discussions before you even implement a program. And then you can make those decisions. And anybody who's implementing it, it's not like, well, let me just throw my marketing ops person over the fence to go work with so-and-so and implement this program. The person who's implementing it needs to understand how sales and marketing work together and the entire flow of the funnel. And a lot of marketing ops people don't fully understand the sales side of things because they have a lot of marketing experience. But on the sales side, the stages and the different nuances in there, they don't quite have that exposure. So the very first time that I implemented it with a new marketing ops person, I sat with them on the calls. Even if I was like, multitasking, I wanted to make sure that everything, and that was an eye opener for me, because then I realized, oh, actually, this person needs a little bit more education in the sales side of things so that they can better understand, because they're going to pull the reports in the end of the day and they're going to help you, present your results to the board and help you tell your story.
You talked earlier about whatever your objective is, right? And some marketers are really top funnel and they're looking for what that MQL, how the MQL came into be and so forth. But you mentioned when I talked to you earlier about how you really think about it as not just top funnel. You're thinking about how we deliver the revenue. So how do you incorporate that into the attribution models and into just your marketing initiatives in general?
Years ago, I worked at a company where I had to present this new marketing strategy for the year. And I reviewed it with my COO and I was all set to prepare. And that night I went back to look over my slides, and I went back to double check my data, dot my I's, cross my T's. And all of a sudden I ran, some multi-touch attribution reports just to verify some of the data. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to make a massive mistake. Oh, this strategy is all wrong. And so I was up till 3 a.m. And I came in the next day and I said to him, I go, hey, I kind of changed all this, and don't worry, I swear to God, it's accurate. It'll be great. But it made us go in a different direction. And what I had noticed was that the things that were bringing in the MQL were not actually what were converting to revenue.
Hmm.
And so some of them were converting to pipe, but not all of them were converting to revenue. And when you looked at that in more detail, like one example is webinars. Someone was like, we have to do more webinars. I'm like, well, do we? I mean, for retaining customers and expansions, absolutely. But what I'm seeing from our data is that no, we actually, for acquisition, they actually are terrible. And so, but in my initial thing, it was like, we should invest in thought leadership and webinars, et cetera. And then I wound up changing the whole thing out. So I've seen it, be helpful in that regard. And when people are thinking about like what brought in the MQL, you can do that in Salesforce with custom code, right? You can say, hey, what was the last touch point that this person did before they converted? And I've often had that as like a check and balance system in the database to sort of say, well, this is what it says is the MQL source, and that's, I've created custom fields for it. But I think that's how I would approach it. And that's how I've done it in the past.
So it sounds like you're saying there that because you took the bigger view of the entire funnel, you realized that some of the things that maybe you were originally going to recommend really weren't affecting the real bottom line outcome that you're looking for. Right?
Yeah, they weren't moving the needle.
Yeah. Huh.
And that's really what multi-touch attribution tells you, right? Like at a high level, I sort of look at this is sort of like when I look at first touch, last touch, it's like, okay, well, it's like Google Analytics. Like it's a great, like, what's the weather going to be like indicator, It's the same for Google Analytics. It's like, mostly directionally accurate, right? But if you look deeper into attribution, a lot of times you'll be surprised how many times it tells a slightly different story. When I used to present to executives, I would show them a very high level attribution model, something that they could really wrap their head around. Like, here's what brought them in. Here's where the lead got created. Here's what converted them to an opportunity. Here's what got close won. Very simple, like a 4-step process, easy to understand. But for marketing, when we were looking at the data, we looked at it all, this full path all the way, because a lot of times CFOs really and CEOs care like what happened up to, the opportunity getting created, like where did the money get created? But I actually care because there's a lot of steps that happen after the op is created by the sales rep to closed won. And sometimes that could be a long period of time. That you're talking about mid-market enterprise. It's going to be a long period of time and a lot of touch points. I would also just tell your audience that I would never, ever set up an attribution system and track sales touch points. I did that once my first time, and it was a huge mistake. And the reason is because it's called marketing attribution for a reason. It's to attribute influence that marketing has and all the campaigns and things that we do on a closed won deal. When you put in the sales touch points, it degrades the ROI for each of those other marketing touch points that you have. And so it's not by huge percentages, but it can be enough. And, when you're using marketing attribution, I've used it to secure people's jobs. It's like, this is what's working. And this is why we need these people and these resources and these things and, these investments. So to me, that's how I've used it in my.
Would that be accurate to say that along the sales touch points, right? There are so many things out of a marketer's control in that space that it really does degrade the data point, right? Because that's going to build a whole different, the price point wasn't right for that organization or whatever, you had to discuss. That seems like it would be out of the marketer's control in some of those areas.
Yeah. And especially if you're only counting up into the opportunity. I mean, if you're only counting up into the opportunity, well, then no one cares about all these other things that happen. But, they have phone calls and negotiations and deals that they make, right? And so a lot of that inhibits or contributes to the final deal, and a marketer doesn't have any say over that.
Yeah, it puts a little noise in the equation, doesn't it?
A lot of noise in the equation, yeah.
Yeah.
How about this other tip that I heard you talk about? How far back should you go measure when you're going to first deploy?
Yeah, I think that depends on who you are targeting. Like if you're targeting SMB, I wouldn't go back like more than 6 months because usually those deals close in 30 to 45 days, maybe 60 days max. And so 6 months. I mean, if you want to track 12, great. Feel free to do it. But 6 months should usually be enough. For mid-market enterprise, I would definitely go back 9 to 12 months if I could. Unless it's a regulated industry. If it's regulated like financial services, healthcare, those types of things where those deals take like 18 months to 3 years to close, then I would say you definitely at least want to go back 12 months. I wouldn't go back further than 12 months unless it was a regulated industry, because beyond 12 months, I don't think marketing should get credit for the deal. Like if you think about it, an attribution, and it's like a lead comes in, you have a lead that you uploaded to the database, and let's say it was a list. Let's say you bought it, you earned it. I don't care how you got this list, but you really want the engagement the first time that contact is engaged with marketing. That's what you want to count. You don't want to count something that came in 3 years ago. We used to have this argument all the time in sales and marketing. Well, it's like, oh, we want to count, this was sales. And I'm like, well, it's because you uploaded it via list like 5 years ago before I even got here. So it wasn't sales, actually. Marketing actually got them re-engaged because, you look at the people and these contacts are either not engaged, unengaged, or they're engaged. And they are all going to get different tactics, right? Based on, what category they fall into. But you really are interested in what you did as a marketer to engage them. And that's what you want to get credit for. And that's what you want to attribute ROI to.
I guess I see what you're saying. At first, I was going to kind of push back on it a little bit because, I mean, there's, like if you have an 18-month sales cycle and you brought in the lead, 19 months ago, whatever, seems like you'd want to get credit for that. But then I guess on the flip side of that, which is what you illustrated, maybe the activity that you do as a marketer to revive or to keep something that maybe was dead for a little bit, but now, through marketing, you've kind of brought that back into the fold. I guess you pick up those. So maybe you lose some, but you pick up some too, because you're focusing on just the activity,
one
right?
thing, right, Alec? Right? Yeah. Like it's like we said earlier, it's always it's more than one thing. You're going to not only, yes, maybe you brought them in 19 months ago, but I'm sure that you've had to do multiple things before that deal closes as a marketer to engage them, whether it be, things that that are hard to track, right? Like maybe they looked at a case study that was ungated, or maybe they, viewed a video on your website that also didn't require any sort of confirmation email or login or anything like that. And those things you want to get credit for, and multi-touch attribution helps you do that.
I think that's even more important now, right? Because not a lot of people are willing to download anymore because they know the game, right? So,
how many fake email addresses? Like it's like blah 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 +1234@gmail.com.
Right. Yeah. I know, which is making it tougher for marketers for sure, right? Because you do want to engage people in the right way, but you really do have to know. So that's the key to multi-touch, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Let's say you're now coming into a situation where there is already some attribution modeling in place, but you've just been hired and you're the new VP of marketing. How would you go about taking a look at that and diagnosing what's already there to see if you need to tweak or adjust something?
Yeah, the funny thing about attribution is when it's not working, I mean, it is, people are always like, I don't even know if this is working properly. Like, if you think it's not working properly, it was probably implemented incorrectly, for sure. I've talked to a lot of people that have implemented systems, and then I would talk to them and I'm like, well, that's probably because this isn't implemented correctly. I remember when I inherited one system, we used Marketo for our forms, but for some reason, our Marketo instance, the forms, for some reason, the landing pages, they didn't have HTTPS, right? So it was like HTTP. And this particular attribution platform was like, it had to have S on the end. It had to be a secure landing page or it wouldn't count it. And I just couldn't understand it because we had all these campaigns and we could see all this data. But man, the attribution software was not picking it up. And I'm like, I could see they're in this campaign, but they're not in the attribution report. Like something is broken. And so it can be as simple as that. I'm a big fan of tracking campaign activity. Not all marketers do it. Not all companies do it. I've been to companies where they're like, we don't track campaigns. I'm like, well, we're going to track them now. So, because you want to know what's working at the lowest level. And sometimes, campaign tracking, although it can be painful, you want to do that. So.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing there is you have to trust your hunch. You kind of have to understand the big picture and see what's going on. And then, like you said, go look at the attribution data to see if it's telling you that, if it's confirming that or if it's not. And that's kind of how you figure out where to go look.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
You don't have to be a data analyst expert to do attribution, but you do need to have some common sense. And if it's here and it's not here, well, it's a check and balance, right? Something's not working. So I would say, don't be afraid of it. Attribution is not a scary thing, although a lot of marketers struggle with it. I have found, and this is not to be pejorative in any way, but I found that usually marketers that come up through the ranks through like brand or product marketing, they struggle with attribution, and rightfully so, because they're not in deep dives of data every day. A demand gen and marketing ops person are very much so. And so it's a little bit easier for them to wrap their heads around it than it is for a brand marketer to wrap their heads around it. And that's sort of where I've seen, the frustration from marketers. It's like, oh, not attribution. Please no. Please don't make me do it. So
I mean, if you're a demand marketer or a marketing ops, I mean, marketing attribution in some ways, that's just what you normally do. It's just part of the job. Like, cause you couldn't be a good demand gen person if you weren't able to show that, oh, okay, yeah, we did this, whatever it was, campaign execution, and it resulted in this.
You're doing it right, but you're not doing multi-touch attribution. So you're not weighting it, right? The thing about multi-touch attribution is it's weighted attribution touch points of a certain percentage of the ROI for the things that matter most to you. So that's why the model that you pick depends, right? So if if first touch is important to you and so is last touch, well, then you might use the U model and give 40% to each of those, and then divide the other 20% up in between all the other touch points in between. But there's some companies that, want to look at the full path all the way from the start to the end, right?
Yeah.
And in demand gen, I feel like you mostly look at on a campaign level, whether or not it's successful, or, yes, that person came in through Google Ads, or yes, this person came in through registering for this event. But you're still looking at it very much at a first touch, sort of last touch, viewpoint, and not really looking at like what is driving. So
okay, yeah, that's a fair point. That's good clarification. So by doing attribution, you're taking the sophistication up a notch. That's for sure. But at least for kind of to your original point, it's probably easier for a demand gen person to kind of grasp taking that level of a step, right? Whereas probably for product marketers like me, like attribution is kind of like, whoa. Scary time.
But this is what has always baffled me. Attribution is about storytelling, right? It is about telling the story you want to tell. So I'm always baffled by when product marketers come up and I'm like, you should be able to tell, what is the story that you want to tell about? Here's some data to help, amplify your story.
I struggle. Sometimes we're talking about a demand gen. Like every single marketer has to justify the spend that they are recommending, right? So it's, aren't we all in the business of attribution at some level? It's kind of like, every one of my CEOs would have pushed back on me and said, well, why are we recommending that? Where are you coming from on that? So I don't know. I've never been in a piece of business where they didn't require you to actually measure what you're doing and, deliver either do I add more spend there or do I change my spend, right? At the very lowest level, right?
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, everybody thinks marketing is about like pretty pictures and,
it's about investment
taglines and cool swag, but it really is a lot more than that. And I remember back 10, 15 years ago where we were just starting to introduce like the data-driven marketer. And now it's like, you have to be data-driven. How else are you going to make a decision? So
Correct.
I agree.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been great. So here's what I heard today. I heard attribution is your friend, data is your friend.
It is your friend. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I heard,
You're telling a story, right?
right. It's about telling a story. I heard, don't get into the, my lead, your lead, sales wedge. That's really bad news when you're in that space. It should be about information. And, maybe while it's not for every level of business, right? You don't want to add complexity where you don't need complexity. It really does up your business and your analytics a notch because you're able to tell a much more rich story than the last touch attribution, which is like an old school thing that I used to do 100 years ago. But so I would definitely need you to coach me, I think, Tracy, on some things for my next multi-touch attribution job. I think that's what I'm going to ask you to do.
Oh, I'm happy to chat with anybody about this. I think it's not super hard, but again, like I wouldn't implement it if I didn't have to, right? And at my last company, I didn't implement it because we didn't have the problem. It was like we were figuring out, it was a 0 to 1 company. How do we make this work? Does it have product market fit? What do we need to do to make the engine work? And I was like, all right, well then we don't need to implement this. We have all the tools that we need to get the data. And we just basically did, marketing mix modeling to sort of predict and understand what was happening. But I don't think you need to implement it if you don't have to. And I know marketers that have ripped it out and said, no, I'm done. I'm not doing it. But again, it comes back to, nothing works unless it's all working together. It's like a car, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I have some healthcare clients and I was thinking about the tail on some of these businesses, right? Some of them are over a year, turn time on a large enterprise piece of business. Some of them are 3 months. And I might adapt it in some areas on some startup businesses, but maybe not on other areas where it's a really, really long sales cycle.
That's a great approach.
Tracy, thanks for sharing. If people want to get in touch with you, I know that you put out stuff on Substack, so we'll include a link to that in our show notes. But how else, if any way, could they get in touch with you if they just wanted to ping a question off of you?
Oh yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm always open to answer a question.
Cool.
That's very nice of you. Thanks for coming in and sharing your thoughts and perspective. Maybe somewhat controversial. I don't know. We'll see the reaction, but very insightful.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate you.